you so much for joining me. This is Tal Aviezer from Cast Party with the July episode of Power Word Talk. I am joined by a wonderful group of panelists. This is take 2 of our attempt to discuss Dungeons and Dragons and women. Some of these same wonderful people joined me, I believe, in March for an attempt to do this show, and unfortunately, the file got corrupted and we lost almost all of it. So I thank you so much, those of you who did do the previous iteration of this, for coming back and doing it again. We also have some new folks joining us for the first time. So it's a large group and we got a lot to cover, so we'll get started. I'm going to go quickly around the table and introduce everybody. We have friend of Cast Party and frequent Power Word Talk guest, Deborah Paradise.
Hello.
We have one of my favorite players, Maria Contreras.
Hello.
We have another one of my favorite people to be in a game with as a co-player from Pop Geeks, Eileen Cruz.
Hello.
And one of my players for whom I'm currently running a wonderful campaign of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden for Cast Party, Sam Hogeweg.
Hi, everyone.
And Cast Party's Rachel Tamarin, familiar to fans of Podcast Party, Descent into Avernus as Ophelia Leodon. Hi, Rachel.
Hey, everybody.
Two of my players from another campaign that's currently ongoing, Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage, Kristen and Bonnie Avery.
Hey there.
Hello.
And finally, Cast Party Dungeon Master, content producer, writer, editor, almost all things Dungeons and Dragons, frequent Power Word Talk guest, Rachel Savicki.
Hello.
As always, we're going to begin with the Dungeons and Dragons news. Usual co-host Matt Gordon is not present this evening, so we're going to need the impromptu jingle to take us into the news segment so that the listener knows it's the news segment. Rachel Tamarin, go ahead and do that.
You got it. Welcome to the news. I'm so much better at intros than Matt.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for doing that.
You're so welcome.
So this is the portion of the show where I'm going to read news items that have happened over the past month since our last show, and I'll ask you for any reactions if you have any to them. First item. Last month on the show, we talked about how there was going to be Dungeon Masters Guild content available on Roll20, Roll20 the virtual tabletop, which has never been the case before, which is great news for content creators like me and Rachel Savicki, that we would finally get to create Dungeon Masters Guild content for Roll20, have our content available for use in Roll20. A lot more people get access to it. Little did we know that that piece of news was followed just a couple of weeks later with the news that Roll20 and One Bookshelf, the owner of Dungeon Masters Guild, have officially merged. So Roll20 and One Bookshelf, which is the parent company of Drive-Thru RPG and Dungeon Masters Guild, announced a merger deal this week. This deal basically brings the largest digital storefront for tabletop role-playing games and the largest virtual tabletop under the same corporate umbrella. And Roll20 is already... They've talked about how, in the coming weeks, Roll20 is going to add PDF support to the virtual tabletop, so you'll be able to upload and read and share and immediately play using PDFs in the virtual tabletop. And I'm quoting, at a later date, the companies will make One Bookshelf PDF libraries accessible within the Roll20 virtual tabletop experience, and are committed to ensuring that One Bookshelf PDFs will not count towards your Roll20 storage quota. The statement goes on to say that Ankit Lal will continue in his role as the CEO of Roll20. He's just started there in January of this year. And One Bookshelf CEO Steve Wyke will join the governing body and executive team at Roll20. Just a couple of addendums, because Rachel, you were on the show. Rachel Savicki, you were on the show last month. We talked about a little bit of this Roll20 One Bookshelf. And
Yes.
I did some through an industry source who shall not be named. I'm able to correct an assumption that I made last month, which
Okay.
was that Wizards of the Coast had to sign off on this deal, which is not true. In fact, Wizards of the Coast had nothing to do with this deal at all. It's strictly a deal between One Bookshelf and Roll20.
Right. So I think last month when we had talked about it, what we had known was that content from Dungeon Masters Guilds was going to be able to be used on Roll20, which was new.
Right.
Which was why we had assumed that Wizards was involved. But this makes a lot more sense now with this added information.
Correct. Although it does lead me to ask, like, in that case, I don't know why they didn't do this a long time ago, like, as far as making that content available. I assume that Wizards was blocking that. The fact that they weren't strikes me as odd. And it looks a little more, to me, like a case of Roll20 kind of circling the wagons a little bit. Like, this is a deal you would make in anticipation of maybe Wizards is, in fact, going to launch their own competitive VTT. So you want to make sure that you have as much content available, if you're Roll20, on your own platform as possible.
Right. So, I mean, my read on this, and maybe I'm missing some of the finer details here, because a lot of, what I'm hearing from you for the first time right now.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like we know that One Bookshelf had the Dungeon Masters Guild deal with Wizards. And so it sounds like, my guess would be maybe they knew that the merger was upcoming, and so they announced the Dungeon Masters Guild part of it before they announced the rest of the merger. But
yeah, I think that's a very logical assumption. Yeah.
So it sounds like this is probably all kind of one deal that we're just getting pieces of, that we're learning about bit by bit.
Right. The other thing is, you were sort of a little more bullish than I was on the idea that the conversion process of Dungeon Masters Guild products to Roll20 was going to have some degree of automation. I was very skeptical about that. But in fact, that does seem to be at least somewhat the case. We're still kind of awaiting details on how that's going to work. Go ahead.
So there definitely are like scripts and things that can automate parts of the process and, pull things from documents and try and make it, a little bit easier than just doing it line by line manually. I don't know to what degree they're going to develop those and make those available as tools to the average content producer like you or I. But I do know that there are ways that they could hypothetically do that. And I'm just very curious to see how much support is going to come out for that, and what they're going to do to hopefully make that process quick and easy for the average community content creator.
I agree. I think that's the big question mark right now, is on a technical level for the content creators. How exactly is this going to work? I still can't help but anticipate this is going to mean a certain amount of conversion work on my end, but we shall see. And we're going to, continue to follow this one and fill in the blanks for content creators as to how your new Roll20 adventures and supplements are going to be created. I still think, great move for Roll20, a great move for One Bookshelf, and has to be seen as a really positive thing for content creators and really for players and DMs too. It's just like more adventures, for them to have in a ready to play state, as opposed to having to do a lot of importing of that material themselves.
Yeah, I definitely see this as a win all the way around. As somebody who does do some VTT conversion for printed modules into things like Roll20, I am very curious as to, exactly what the details are going to be, and whether it's going to be something where all of a sudden a lot of people need that service, or all of a sudden it's very automated.
Yeah.
So
I suspect that you're not going to have any shortage of people looking for you to do that conversion. Next item. Earlier this week, the long-awaited release of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, after a delay. It was actually supposed to come out last month, but like so many things right now, it's like an international shipping problem and a materials problem that caused the physical books to be delayed because they couldn't get them out to the distributors. And as a result, Wizards of the Coast decided to delay the digital release as well. Hold it back, basically, so it would coincide with the physical release. I guess so as not to hurt the physical book business, right? Because if it became available digitally a month before it was available physically, I think a lot of people would have just said, oh, fuck it, I'll just get the D&D Beyond version or the Roll20 version. I won't worry about the physical book. And they would have been left holding the bag, probably on a lot of print material. The result is it's now a lot of things coming out very close together. Because it got pushed back, it's coming pretty close to the release of the Spelljammer book, which is now less than a month away. Spelljammer Adventures in Space. And also there's a Target exclusive box set that's actually coming out this weekend, July 31st. That is Dragons of Stormwreck Isle. So there's 3 adventure products coming out in the same 30-day period, which is a lot. And I hope it doesn't cause Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel to be overlooked, because it's a really cool product. It's the first book of adventures written entirely by writers of color, drawing from their own cultures and backgrounds to create worlds that are unlike others made previously in Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of the legacy Dungeons and Dragons worlds, most of them have sort of a primarily like fantasy Europe base. The things like Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk, Bryn, and places like that. So this is quite different. It's inspired by cultures in Central America, South and East Asia, the Caribbean, and other places. And I'm very happy to see that. I'm very happy for these authors that got to work on it. And I guess this will be the first time that we're sharing this news, but Cast Party is going to be running one of these adventures, an adventure called Salted Legacy by writer Serena Marie, as an upcoming podcast miniseries, dungeon mastered by the Stuart Sutcliffe of Cast Party, Luke McCormick. And this one takes place in a setting called Sabsung Ko, which is inspired by the culture of Thailand. Has anybody else had a chance to take a look at this, Journeys of the Radiant Citadel, or any thoughts about it?
Well, I haven't gotten a chance to take a look yet, but I just want to throw in that I'm really, really excited about it. It looks amazing from everything that I've seen. And I'm just, again, as you said, really excited that these creators are getting a platform to really showcase their own creativity. And I just can't wait to dive in.
I know there's an actual play of one of the adventures, The Fiend of Hollow Mine, that ran on D&D Beyond. I know Matt Mercer was one of the players in that campaign. It was kind of an all-star cast of people. It was supposed to be really good. There's so much actual play stuff that I don't have the time or opportunity to watch, but I'm planning to get to that one eventually. Any other thoughts on Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel?
If nothing else, take a look at the artwork, and that book just looks phenomenal.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
So I didn't want to be the one to just geek out about the art, but yeah.
Oh, let's geek out about the art.
It looks so cool. It's such great colors. I love the alternate cover art that they did for this one, probably more than most of the alternate cover art that they come out with. It's just very cool designs that are, very different from what we're used to seeing, but still like very eye-catching. It's a very pretty book.
I got it, but because I'm going to be a player in this game that actual play that Cast Party's doing of one of the adventures, I am embargoed from reading it until after we have recorded that game. So it's a little bit of torture for me. But I'm looking forward to getting into it as soon as I won't be spoiling it for myself by doing so.
I'll throw out that looking at pictures doesn't involve words or reading.
True.
I was thinking the same thing.
There was some new Unearthed Arcana playtesting material released this month. It was under the heading of Wonders of the Multiverse. For those of you who don't know, Wizards of the Coast, the company that makes Dungeons and Dragons, periodically release what they call Unearthed Arcana, which is playtesting material to the community to basically mess around with it, see if it's broken. People use it in their home games and then report back on how it was, and then some of it gets used in future products. Some of it gets tweaked based on the playtesting feedback, the sort of crowdsourced playtesting feedback, and some of it gets totally dropped and you never see it again. It just kind of doesn't make the cut. So this new playtest material features a playable race called Glitchlings, a new cleric domain, the cleric domain of Fate, a collection of backgrounds including Gate Warden, Giant Foundling, Planar Philosopher, and Rune Carver, and a collection of new feats focusing on giants, primordial magic, and the planes, and a selection of new spells exploring fate and chance. The Glitchling race are described as being created by forces of planar law and made from a merger of magic and machine, and they come from the plane Mechanus, which in Dungeons & Dragons has been the plane that represents order, and is probably most familiar to longtime players as being the home of creatures called Modrons, which are sort of little adorable robot-like creatures. It's almost like they're playtesting Modrons and just calling them Glitchlings for the purpose of the playtest so people don't lose their minds. the content of this Unearthed Arcana, at least some of it certainly suggests that this is playtesting material for some sort of Planescape product. Planescape is a Dungeons and Dragons setting that has to do with a city called Sigil, which sits basically at the center of the multiverse, and there are doors leading to all of the different planes. So you can leave Sigil and go to Avernus, you can leave it and go to Heaven, you can leave it and go to Abyss or Mechanus or all of these different places that you can travel to. Like, it has a rabid cult following. I don't know that Planescape was ever all that popular. There was a really popular CRPG a long time ago now, 1999, called Planescape Torment. That is very beloved. But as a tabletop game, it was never a big financial success, but it has a definite devoted cult following. So when this Unearthed Arcana came out, people were very excited at the idea that Planescape might finally be introduced into 5th edition. But the other thing going on here that doesn't seem to be Planescape related is there's like a lot of stuff involving giants. There's a background where you can be like a normal sized person who was raised by giants. So you see yourself as a giant, although you're not, or you sort of had to develop a lot of tough survival skills because you were the only non-giant in your family. There's a rune carver, which is a character who uses the runes of giants to create magic. So it seems like there might be 2 books we're looking at here, maybe something about Planescape, and maybe another book that's like somebody's guide to giants, kind of like the Fizban's Treasury of Dragons book that just came out. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this, if anybody's looked at any of this stuff.
I would just like to call dibs on playing the normal person raised by giants.
Okay, sounds good.
Amazing.
I will say what stood out for this was the number of feats. I don't think I've read that many feats in a row until I sat down with that Unearthed Arcana.
Yeah, and it seems to have this thing they've been leaning towards lately, which is that like you need to take 1 feat first to get another feat later on. So the feats are kind of chained together in a way we haven't seen that much of in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and which, long story short, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that, for those of us that are like really steeped in it, it kind of feels natural, but I think, the game is still growing and new players are joining, and I don't know that it really benefits from adding more complexity or more expectations of system mastery, which is really what that is. Like, I got to be familiar with the material well enough to know that, man, when I hit 4th level, I better take this feat so that when I'm 8th level, I'll be able to take this. I guess for the person who really wants to approach the game that way, that's fine. I just hope that like you don't end up in a situation where the person that does that ends up with a much more powerful character than the person they're in a playing group with who's playing much more casually and isn't paying that kind of granular attention to the mechanics. They released this free adventure, Spelljammer Academy. It's actually a series of 4 adventures. They're being released for free weekly on D&D Beyond. 3 out of the 4 have been released at the time of this recording. And they're meant to introduce people who are unfamiliar to the concepts of the Spelljammer setting. So you're kind of in like school, like Spelljammer school. You're a cadet. And it's a series of 4 adventures that prepares you for your journeys into space. And if you have a D&D Beyond account, you can go grab it. It's free. There's no reason not to get it. In the first adventure, you undergo your orientation at Spelljammer Academy, and you learn whether you have what it takes to traverse the deadly expanse of the cosmos. As long as you get the first one, then the other ones just unlock every week until you have all 4 of them. You start at level 1. By the end of part 4, you're level 5. I will say that involves leveling up really quickly because each of these parts is only about 2 hours long. So you're going from level 1 to 5 in about 8 hours of play, which is really quick. I've read parts 1 and 2. As someone who's relatively new to Spelljammer, having read them, I actually don't feel like I have that much more of an understanding of Spelljammer than I did before reading them. And I kind of still feel like I need to wait for the paid product to come out to really understand what it is that I'm looking at. But it's free. It's another thing that's different. And I know that sort of merging Dungeons and Dragons with sort of going into space and having more science fiction-y type adventures is something that a lot of people want. I feel like maybe they're holding a little too much back. Like there's one part where it's not a major spoiler, but you're like, your group is trying to fly your Spelljammer ship through an asteroid field, And it's just like people who want to help make the ship fly better should make a strength check. I find that a little too abstract. Like, what am I doing to make a strength check to help my spaceship fly better? Am I like leaning on the wall? Like, I just wish it would do more things to like help me actually understand like what is involved there. That sort of this sort of skill check would lead to more imaginative play if they would supply a little more detail and context about, you know, what you can do in that situation. Because I wouldn't, like, Tal, if you put me in a spaceship, I wouldn't know how to get out of the asteroid field. You know, I need you to paint that for me a little bit.
I'm going to disagree with you on this one, Tal. I think it is.
You would know how to
cute.
do it? Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea how to get out of an asteroid field. I would say banging on things usually has some kind of effect on something.
Yeah.
But I will say, in terms of what these adventures are, I think they're cute. I'm enamored of them. I think what these are really going to be helpful with, and I think the reason why they're putting them out now prior to Spelljammer being released, is not to I think it's one, to hype. Yeah. But this is really going to be for especially your new D&D players who are jumping in, and you're jumping in with a Spelljammer setting. This is an onboarding adventure to kind of get you through what is a D&D player. Yeah, how do I make some moves? How do I roll some attacks? How do I do some NPC interactions or some, you know, PC interactions? And I think actually these, well, what's up released now is 3 adventures, do offer quite a mix of attacks and social interaction. And so while I don't think this is meant for like, you know, the hardcore D&D player, you know, to like really invest, you know, a campaign is going to like be helmed to these 4 little modules. I think it's, for what it is, I think it's actually pretty cool. And I think that's why they're making it free, because they are not like those kinds of like bones that you would see on a bigger module set.
Yeah, I totally buy that. And listen, I'm not demanding my no money back that I spent on it, right? Like it's cool. It's a free product. And I think you're right that it does a good job with the 3 pillars of Dungeons and Dragons. Like there's definitely a nice mix of combat and role playing and exploration and discovery. It felt like more of a youth product to me, which is also, again, fine. But I felt like it was more aimed at the sort of 12-year-old level than an adult player. But, you know, any DM could make it their own and tweak it in various ways. Has anybody else checked out any of this material?
So I have taken a quick skim through it. I have not done a full read of the ones that I have, but I have been grabbing it every time, you know, they send me the email and tell me that there is a new one. Personally, I love that they're doing this because honestly, like I probably would not have delved into Spelljammer that much otherwise until I had a group that was like, oh man, we want to do Spelljammer. So like it's a really cool way to just kind of keep it on everybody's radar and get the setting that hasn't been, you know, written for much in a very long time, you know, back in front of new players. So I think they're making a great call by doing that. And I think that in addition, you know, the fact that they're putting it on D&D Beyond is, you know, introducing people to D&D Beyond who, you know, otherwise might not have signed up for an account to go get the cool new adventure. So I think that all around this is a really smart marketing plan, and I am very much looking forward to actually getting to sit down and do a full read. And as far as like it being geared towards, you know, what you said, kind of younger players, I'm kind of not surprised because Spelljammer is kind of over the top. Like that's part of it. And like that kind of setting, I feel like very easily is the kind of thing that appeals to those kind of younger players who are just gonna, you know, jump in and be like, and then there's spaceships and asteroids and explosions. And I feel like there's a really good synergy to be hit there.
Absolutely. And Rachel, I will be happy to play in your Spelljammer game, and I will bring my childlike sense of wonder to the table.
Awesome.
When you run one. Final news item. Guessing most of you have seen this. The trailer for Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves dropped this month.
Oh, yeah.
I'm interested in hearing everyone's reactions.
I cannot wait. Is it March 3rd yet?
Is that when's coming out? March 3rd, 2023?
Yep. My alarm's already set for it. I'm very excited. It looks like a lot of fun. I don't care that the tiefling has a, traditionally human skin tone or that her horns are small. I don't care about any of that.
Or that the druid turns into an owlbear. I think we can all agree that we don't care. Or if anything, it's a problem that you can't do that in the game. It's not that the movie's wrong, it's that the movie's right and the game is wrong.
Well, maybe it'll spark a change in the game.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
It just seemed they're just having fun with it. And I don't know if any of you saw the San Diego Comic-Con panel, but they seem to really stress the authenticity of the game and also the silliness that comes with playing it, even though you're playing a serious adventure. We all have weird, silly moments, and that's like a huge part of what makes it so enjoyable. And it seemed like they're doing that in the movie, so who cares about the semantics?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I was on board, when they started making fun of the bard.
I will say the first time we discussed this, which feels like ages ago, we had talked about the fact that, like, wouldn't it be cool if it were kind of Jumanji-esque? Mm-hmm. And I was watching it for, like, the third time, and I'm like, you know what? I'm actually okay right now if it doesn't turn into a Jumanji-esque type of platform setup. Because I think the other part of D&D actual plays and hopefully this movie is that D&D is a bunch of people getting together and trying to do something and screwing up all over the place.
Yeah.
And, as long as that sort of, that energy is what's being captured, I'm okay if it's not like, and we're zooming out to the actual people who are playing these bards and sorcerers and everything. So I'm pleasantly holding out hope that no matter either way this goes, if they could just be holding back that, secret, I'm actually pretty excited for either way.
To clarify, what Deborah's referring to is when we discussed this movie previously, I made it very clear that I wanted Chris Pine to have, like, Patton Oswalt playing the player, who was Chris Pine in the game. Then you would cut back to Patton Oswalt at the table, or a child. And the kind of pathos of the in-game parts would play out what tensions and stuff was going on in the lives of the real-world players, and you cut back and forth. Kind of like the Lego movie.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the Jumanji thing, like, it's something that if it needs to be executed right, like if it's done very well with the switching back and forth between what's happening in game and what's happening with the players and the dungeon master, like arguing amongst themselves in real time or something, it could turn out pretty bad if it's not done right. It would be interesting to see if they do that, but seeing it just straight up just adventure, like focused on the characters themselves, I think would be best for now. I mean, they could explore that in future projects.
Yeah, I completely agree. I like the fact that they, from what I saw in the trailer, it looks like just regular players like myself who, with other, I guess, people that I've played with, who just mess things up and kind of have to figure out how to fix it again.
Yeah, totally. I love that the whole core premise is that they have to fix the problem that they created.
Yeah.
Yeah, like once I got myself eaten by a toad, and I had to get, like, my teammates had to, like, get me out of the toad. And it was just like, it's kind of similar to what I saw on the trailer, and it's just like, that's
it happens.
I love that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, whoever had the good sense to make Chris Pine a bard and not something like a fighter or a paladin.
Oh man,
great job.
It was a great move.
And
so excited.
Seeing all the classic D&D monsters, I thought was very charming. Like to see the gelatinous cube and the displacer beast.
There's supposed to be a lot of Easter eggs, a lot more than were shown in the trailer.
That's awesome.
So, yeah,
that's super exciting.
It's also good that to see the different kinds of dragons as well. Like, I feel like the average moviegoer is gonna see the black dragon that was swooping down and be like, wait, what? It doesn't breathe fire?
Yeah.
Excuse me? And then, the people who play D&D are like, we recognize what this is. We know all about it. And the big chunky one at the end, I think was in the volcano. That was pretty neat that they go for different body types, embracing different body types for the dragons.
Yeah, body positivity for the dragons.
And you have a paladin trying to one-shot a dragon. That's just pure D&D right there.
Love it.
Yeah. It feels like a love letter to the game.
Yeah.
At least as far as the trailer would suggest. And I think, well-told story is a well-told story. And I'm certainly looking forward to getting the full picture from this little taste.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Rachel, can you take us out of the news?
Now the news is over, and some really badass ladies are gonna talk about D&D. Yay!
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're so welcome.
At this point, I'm mostly going to shut up and turn the show over to you. The way this section is going to work is the panelists all sent in questions, and each panelist is going to ask their own question and then moderate the discussion of that question. Eileen, I believe you had the first question.
Well, ladies, good evening. I have a question here for you, and it is, before you began playing D&D, were you hesitant to try the game, or were you like just ready to dive in at your first chance to play?
So when I started playing, I had heard about D&D, and it was very much like the cool thing that some other, like kids did. And so when I got the chance, I was absolutely super enthusiastic to dive into the rule book. And then when I actually realized how complicated it was, I was less excited to do anything more than character building. But I had a lot of fun with character building early on.
I'd been wanting to play for a while. It had been on my radar. I was in theater in high school. It just seemed like something I would enjoy. I like fantasy, imagination, all that is my jam. And I couldn't really find a group. No one else was really interested. I tried finding online, but I felt too intimidated to jump into a game with established people not knowing how to play. And then I saw Tal post on Facebook for Cast Party a free game to join. And I was like, well, what better way to try to learn than to just jump in? So I was kind of ready to just go all in. It took me a bit to learn it, but it was really fun to dive into it. And then I never left and recruited everyone else.
For me, it was a mix of hesitation but ready to dive in. I'd always, I was a big Lord of the Rings fan. I kind of knew, Bonnie was really into Critical Role, but I think I was hesitant because I was worried about like the time commitment and kind of the complexity of the game that was about to happen. But I mean, my hesitation was so, so off. It was, I was just so excited once we started playing and really got sucked into it. So it really, it was awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to interject with that because, I got introduced through Critical Role because I basically just, I was more into like the whole voice actor kind of aspect of it, like with watching anime and all that. And I think I watched a clip on YouTube and then started to go down the rabbit hole of listening to episodes. And I was trying to get my sister to understand, like, hey, excuse me, this is something that you would enjoy. I want to play with you. And we should do this. And she would be like, I don't know, I don't think I have the time commitment, and just come up with excuses. And I was just like, gosh darn it. And I think thanks. Yeah, of course it wouldn't be a sibling situation if it wasn't me bugging you, because I'm the younger one, you're the older one, so it's only fair. But yeah, so
True.
It did some of the Cast Party stuff. I actually found out that I was betrayed when it turned out she was doing a game with coworkers. And I was not invited, apparently, so. But eventually kind of managed to get in there and started playing alongside her with my own character. And I mean, maybe someday we'll play as siblings in another game, I don't know. But yeah, I was ready to go dive right in, basically, and I'm glad that she actually ended up, liking it just as much.
I'm glad you're in the party.
And was there any one moment that just hooked you?
I mean, I think when I realized, it's not just a strategy game, there is the whole role-playing aspect and the character stuff involved. That was definitely it, because a long time ago when I was younger, I was like, D&D is for, like, super nerds. I don't think I'd ever be into that. And then fast forward to now, and it's like, well, here I am.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I don't know why D&D wasn't on my radar as a kid, because I was like classic book nerd, sci-fi, fantasy, in the theater all day, every day, and this was nowhere on my radar. I don't know why, but I think it was interesting. That kind of came at it from like an adult perspective because I had been listening to podcasts in the Adventure Zone. And then I kind of worked my way backwards, I think, into Critical Role. And then during the pandemic, no one was doing anything. And all of a sudden I had all this time on my hands. And when a friend said they were starting up a campaign and would I want to play, I just swung at it.
For me, it wasn't like that at all. I actually had never heard of D&D until I started college and I went to the Anime and Video Game Club. And it happened to be that Tal had come in to help and teach the club how to play and make D&D characters. And I was sort of dragged into it. I did not want to go. I didn't know what it was. I thought that it was some weird thing that I didn't understand. And until he helped me make my own character, I was like, oh wow, this is something I actually might be interested in. So that's how I was introduced into it, and I was definitely not ready to dive into it because I didn't know how to role play in anything. I didn't think I was good at acting or pretending to be like a different person. So that was very interesting. For me, it was very interesting to just dive into this new world for me. And even now, it's sometimes still a little bit difficult to just immerse myself into it.
Really exciting. I'm glad that you had such a good experience with it that you're continuing to play. In my case, I had sort of been interested in getting into tabletop gaming in general, and towards the end of one of those moments is like at the end of my first marriage, I was looking at tabletop gaming as maybe like a way we could spend some more time together. And unfortunately, my partner at the time, he sort of had a thing about like the whole echelon of nerds, where some hobbies within nerddom were more acceptable than others. So I don't have that point of view. I'm just like, if as long as your bills are paid on time and you're doing healthy things, love what you want to love. So once the marriage ended and eventually I started dating my husband, he started introducing me to the game by telling me about his own exploits in Dungeons and Dragons. And we started watching like Acquisitions Inc. and Critical Role. And, it was just so much fun. And then eventually he went and invited me to a game and I was just hooked. And it's mainly, the thing that really speaks to me is like the role-playing part of it. I have a lot of fun with that. I think during the first game that he invited me to, I was guesting as an NPC. And I believe, I remember my character just spent a lot of time carving wooden frogs out of, just spending my whole time carving wooden frogs. And then I pulled like out a big move at the end of the game and, just basically said, what do you think? I just spend all my time carving frogs?
Nice. Plot twist.
Pretty awesome.
Awesome.
So my question comes from a place I have GM'd in a lot of different scenarios. Before the pandemic, I was working at a game shop, and I have played online, both as a GM and as a player. And so my question for the rest of the ladies here is, in your time playing D&D or running D&D, how often have you found that men try to explain things to you that you already know, and how do you deal with that when it happens? So basically,
Rachel, I love this question. Oh,
yeah. Basically, how often do you feel like you have people mansplain things to you, and how do you deal with it when it happens?
I think I've been very lucky to not experience that. I think
That's
the times
awesome.
that
That's
it
great to hear.
happened, I know, and I think I'm very, very lucky that it hasn't happened. The few times that it has happened, I think that I sort of just not let it happen, but I let them talk and kind of dig themselves into a hole where I'll just ask questions that follow up and be like, oh, okay, so then if I did this, then how do I do that if I already did that? And they'll try to explain it to me again, and I'll just kind of listen. And I'll just look at my dungeon master, and they know what I'm doing. And so it's fun to do that. And I know Tal's been my dungeon master several times, and in his games that rarely happened, but when it did happen, he was really good at preventing it. But he did call it out if it ever did happen, so I think that it was really great when it did happen and when it didn't happen, which isn't something that, you would expect to hear, but
Right.
Mm.
Definitely awesome that you haven't had to, experience that a whole lot. And it sounds like you've got a really good way to deal with it.
For me, I really love this question, and I'm so glad that it came up because, I think often, and this question kind of forced me to think about mansplaining in a different way because, it's easy to think of the stereotype of like, oh, it only happens at like a larger level, or it only happens at like events where you don't know people. I primarily play with my friends, but
right.
Absolutely. Yeah. There have been times where, not meaning to, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that it's not always this intentional malicious thing, but that doesn't mean that it's not bothersome when, people will try to, for example, like tell you how you should spend your turn, or try to strategize something that maybe maybe you're thinking like 3 steps ahead of where they're thinking,
Yeah.
And
I mean, oftentimes it is, genuinely well-intentioned of like, they want to help you, understand the rules, but
and
it comes with the assumption
there are times where oh, go ahead. Yeah, you're right. It's tied to this assumption that like you don't know better than they do, or that there's something that you are missing. Sometimes it is genuinely helpful, and I do want to shout out Tal for a second because I don't want you to sit there thinking, oh my God, have I done this to Rachel a million times? Because like, well, the answer is like, yeah, we've all done this sort of thing to each other sometimes. But I am particularly grateful. I will not spoil the circumstances in which it occurs, but stay tuned for a podcast episode in your future where I fully forgot that I had a spell scroll of mass healing word, and there was a great time to use it, and I'm really glad Tal reminded me that I had it. But all of this to say, yeah, there are times where it can be really frustrating or annoying for someone, again, with often the best of intentions, genuinely wanting to help, to be like, here's what you should do, telling you how to play your own character. And I mean, the thing is too, like, sometimes I fight strategically, sometimes, or make a decision based on strategy. Sometimes it's inspired by what my character would do. And even if I know something is a better move strategically, maybe my character doesn't.
Sure.
Or again, maybe I have a longer game that somebody else doesn't see. And so what I try to do in those moments where I'm feeling that way is just say, okay, thank you for sharing. And then be like, well, I'm going to do something else though, or yeah, I had thought of that, but I'm going to do this, so that it's not turning into this whole big thing, but I'm making it clear I am making my own decisions,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And again, none of this is intended to, tell people to not explain things to other people who may be newer players. It's,
or remind them that they have a scroll of mass healing word, because sometimes like they really do want to heal the party and you just forgot you had it in your inventory. So.
Does anybody else have any creative ways that you deal with this when this kind of a thing happens?
In my case, I just sort of either say what I'm going to do instead, or just tell them, yeah, I got it, and just sort of let it sit there. But also, I don't have as much experience as other players, so a lot of the people that I have played with have been very helpful in giving me this information about, ways that I could play the character.
Definitely. And like we said, it is often well-intentioned, and, a lot of times people are helping to explain things and it is genuinely helpful. This is, more geared towards, the situation where, I know, for example, for me, one of the things that I ran into a couple weeks ago was, I GM a lot. I was playing a monk, and somebody was sitting there trying to explain to me how to use my key points. And I'm sitting there like, but I know how to use my key points. Like, do you know how many games I've run with monks in them in the past month? It's a lot.
So, what are some of the things that DMs and other players have done to make you feel more comfortable as a player at the table?
I can take a swing at this one. So I will say having GMs or DMs check in with your players before you get started, that's always been like, either it's a session 0 or if it's like a one shot, just like having either a verbal or a written conversation. Because like sometimes it's really small things that a DM can do that can actually like really make a game. Like, for example, Tal one time, made a executive decision about where I was sitting at a table, and that really helped me out. So, having that communication and being open and receptive in communicating both ways, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that as well. Tal is our DM, and we've played with some other DMs. I feel like pretty much all of them have done like a check-in beforehand, or with an Excel sheet, or just like, what are topics you do not want to be discussed, what are topics you're okay with in passing, and I felt that was very helpful too, because then you're free to anonymously kind of say what you'd rather not have in the game and what would make you uncomfortable, and then from the get-go, you're not going to have to deal with that.
I will say that with games in physical space, one of the biggest things that people have done to make me feel comfortable and welcome and included have been those things like saying, hey, why don't you sit here, either next to me, the DM, or next to this particular player who like they know is going to be really helpful if anything comes up. And really just kind of that direction and that, kind of, pairing you with somebody who's going to, help you out and make sure that you're having fun is really great.
I can definitely agree with the check-in. I know I keep talking about Tal, but he's been like my main dungeon master, and one other person, my friend, thinks that they've both done is kind of check in with me in a very subtle way, which is not calling me out specifically, but kind of just gently nudging me and telling me like, what do you want to do? Because sometimes I'll ask the table what they want to do, what do they think I should do, and sort of just let the group decide what they think I should do and just do that. And they've both kind of pushed me to do what I want to do, what I think is important, or what's important to me, what I want to do, and for me to speak up on my own, which was very eye-opening, especially the first time around that I played D&D with y'all. Because I didn't really think about that before. I didn't really it didn't click in my head that I had that choice or that option to just decide what I wanted personally. Like I've always like asked what other people wanted and kind of just came to like a group decision. Instead it was just, what do you want? What do you think? And that was very like eye-opening in a very weird way. And that made me very, very comfortable because I felt like heard and respected, not just by like him but by everyone else as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always a sort of difficult thing to navigate, that balance between keeping it all collaborative, but also making sure that you're getting fulfillment out of the game. And do you feel like you're getting that out of the game?
Yeah, it was definitely at first it was a little bit difficult for me because I didn't understand, not that I didn't understand how to do it, but it was like, oh, okay, so I have a choice in what to do. But how do I do this? I don't understand what I should do or what I shouldn't do, especially being very new to the game. But then, like, realizing, oh, okay, so I can do whatever I want. And one of the choices that I always talk about is I was a halfling in one of the games that I played, and I drank a potion that made me into a giant, and so I was 8 feet tall. And I asked Tal if I could pick up a human and throw them at 3 other people. And he said no. And I asked if I could roll for it. And he said I would have to roll a nat 20. And so I rolled for it, and I rolled a natural 20. That's my first natural 20.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me, the table looked at me, and we're just like, okay.
The dice
Guess
is
we're getting
spoken.
thrown. So that was like one of the best memories that I have, and like experiences that just kind of really just make me happy and make me just like love D&D even more, and make me want to play it more and more.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that story. That's a really great story.
Hey guys, so I was wondering what your experiences have been with gender diversity, whether that's with pre-written D&D modules or just standard campaigns that you're in. And this came about from a conversation that I was having with some cast party people, where I actually ended up digging into Waterdeep Dragon Heist because I had been running it at the time, and went through and figured
Love
out that like
adventure.
of, in the first 2 chapters, we're running about a 3-to-1 male to female NPC ratio. And that was really taking me aback for a second. I'm like, oh, it's actually in the book, this gender discrepancy. Okay. So I was wondering how you guys have had any experiences or interactions with gender representation.
I think it definitely depends on how old the module is. I know that there's some particularly cringy stuff in Curse of Strahd as far as gender representation versus, some of the newer stuff, which I know Wizards has made a very affirmative decision to try and be better with diversity, representation, and inclusion. And I feel like a lot of the newer things have actually been really good. So I very much, I think they did a pretty solid job in Descent into Avernus. And I've been running some of the Candlekeep mysteries for some of my players. And it seems like those are pretty well balanced as well so far. So yeah, I definitely think it depends on when the published piece came out, but it definitely seems to be moving in a good direction.
Yeah, and I know, we're still talking about 5e here. Like, we're talking about the more recent, past to future. But if you look at how Dungeons and Dragons as a game and as a franchise has evolved over time, I think there's been enormous progress from when it started to where we are now, even at the beginnings of 5th edition. I know I've talked about this a little bit before in the past. You had some negative to your strength automatically because you were a woman. All of these things that were so unnecessary and so cringy. And, my first game, I was playing with a group of good friends, and we were playing a game with minis. And so everyone was going and picking the minis for their character. And now, these are minis that my friend had for like a decade at least. But I was noticing there were almost no minis who were women that were not clad in, some sort of battle thong, incredibly exposed, not super practical from a protection standpoint armor. And I was dissatisfied with the choices that I had because those are my only choices. This is not to say by any means, and I know I have friends. I'm remembering a time actually that we were playing with some folks from Red Monkey Theater Group, the theater company that Tal and I are both part of, and I was telling this story to them. And my friends Amy and Melissa Fry were, I was describing this and they were like, war bikinis? Yes, I want one of those. Why can't I have one of those right now? And I think it's, it just goes to show it's about choice, and it's about having the ability to decide, because maybe you do want to play a character that fights in, a battle bikini. Or maybe you want to play a character that fights in a suit of armor, and you should have the choice to do everything. And I'm glad that there has been a conscious effort from Wizards of the Coast and just in general, the D&D fan base, I would say, and the players to be more inclusive than ever before. And again, it's, there's always more work to be done, and it is getting better and better over time. I appreciate looking back, how far we've come from where we were, and I appreciate that too.
And also, I feel like even when you are playing, or when I've been playing older modules, that the DMs that I've had the pleasure of playing with, they've all been very good at editing out the more cringy content.
I think that's really important, that idea of choice, and that GMs and DMs have choice when you're running. Even if it's a pre-written module, even having this and doing this for this chapter made me think about hey, I can consciously, no one knows what gender this NPC is. I'm switching up right now. And I think that's really important that you brought that up, that idea of choice, and that you have ownership over that.
Have you ever played in a group that was all or mostly women? And if so, what was that dynamic like?
So I'm going to jump in with the real quick answer here and just say no. I have always been significantly in the minority as a woman at a gaming table.
I will say I was very blessed that my first game was all female players. Was a male DM, but everyone who was playing at the table, virtual table, was women. And I think it was a very good first experience to have because it allowed me to feel a lot more free and open to kind of just go at 100 miles an hour. And if I tripped and fell on my face, it was totally okay. I felt like it was a really supportive environment.
That's really beautiful. And I'm so glad you got to have that experience. It's interesting because in D&D, my experience has been, no, I've always been at a fairly mixed table in terms of gender diversity, but I am currently playing a different tabletop game called Seafarer. We do have a male GM, but everyone else in the party is female, though not everyone is playing a female character, which is interesting and fun. Love choice. It's funny because we all sort of collectively decided it's a campaign where the setting is designed very much to be this kind of Victorian steampunk, very dark kind of a storyline. And we just all decided to choose characters who basically are determined to have a great time no matter what, in spite of their surroundings, and like just be kind to people and like, you know, go on fun little adventures and help their friends. And it's been a really interesting dynamic. And, you know, we all just were like so here for the concept and really, you know, have continued to run with it we've been playing, I think, for a little over a year now. But I don't know that a group of men in that same setting or a more gender diverse group would have had that inclination or would have been so ready to just run full force into like the sheer whimsy of it all. Not that I don't think men can be whimsical, because I certainly do. But the fact that it was like, we're going to lean into the silliness in a serious universe. I think having the freedom, that I can't remember who it was mentioned before, to just have a group that is really supportive and allows you to immediately feel kind of more comfortable making a decision that may or may not be kind of a weird out there choice.
I know I'm supposed to shut up, but I kind of wanted to invite Bonnie and or Kristen to chime in on this one, just because I'm selfishly curious about their experience. I'm currently running a group for them. There are 8 players in the group, and 7 of the 8 are women. I'm just wondering what that has been like.
Oh yeah, I was going to pop in with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been super fun. I feel like everyone's personality is really brought to the table. And I think because we all started kind of as newbies and we had all kind of known each other previously, we have this, you know, comfort level in playing. It's funny when you were talking about being whimsical. I was like, do we ever get whimsical? I was like, yeah, sometimes we do. We like manufactured this really cute mouse the other day, but you know, at the end of a battle, we're like, loot the body. What's on him? Anything good? All right. So
I kind of wonder too, like in a situation, I guess, where like there's only one male player amongst a bunch of female players, if there's a similar feeling of like being outnumbered or being like, do I fit in this group, or some sort of something similar that I guess a lot of women might experience being in a group of men. But I don't know. I can't speak for the player themselves in this case.
I think I'll speak on behalf of all men, or Juan, in this case, the player we're talking about. I think I will say he's such a cool person, and I think he's very secure and confident, you know, really in himself, and I don't feel like he feels like he has anything to prove from a gender standpoint. I'm confident there are men that would be freaked out in the situation that he's in, but I don't think he is at all. I think he's very happy.
So I wonder if you have felt that an experience is different at a mostly male-dominated table versus a mostly female-dominated table, and kind of like changing it up, so I know it sounds a little bit similar to Eileen's question. If there are any things that you sort of self-censor, or if you avoid doing certain things when you're at a mostly male-dominated table?
The campaign I'm playing is equally divided, but I've done some of the one-shots where it was, none of them I think were female-dominated or mostly, but it was mixed or mostly men. And I do feel like the vibe was slightly different. Part of that could be we're all new people thrown together for a one-shot, so that in itself can change the dynamic. But I feel like, well, for myself, being a woman and identifying as one, I feel like I take more time in the role-playing aspect and less time in the combat aspect. And I more quickly want to strategize or get out of combat, or do something different. And I felt in more games with more men that we are a little bit more quick to fight, which makes sense. I mean, you are playing D&D, you're there to fight. But that was just the bigger difference that I've noticed, where when more women are playing, I do feel like maybe we play slower, or maybe we want to explore different avenues or strategize in a different way.
I think that's really interesting, because when you said that, it made me kind of think of my experiences. And I've noticed at male-dominated tables, very often there have been situations where a number of players at the table start like kind of getting into an argument, or sort of like getting kind of into the nitty-gritty and kind of just like devolving into circular talk. And I sometimes go like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to act so that we can get out of this circular talking and move on. Because sometimes it gets very much sort of you're grinding on one particular topic or thing, and it feels like you are kind of sitting on the outside, and you're like, do I engage with this, or do I try to shift it so that there's something that maybe more people can, including myself, engage with?
I'm going to say it's interesting that you bring that up as an anecdote, because one that sprung to mind in my head was that I've noticed a tendency when I play with largely male-dominated groups for there to be one particular individual at the table who will steamroll seems like a strong word, but who will say like, this is what I want to do, so we're going to do it. And you know, as a party, we tend to be supportive, but that's been an interesting difference, is that it feels like in a group that is, you know, more balanced in terms of gender diversity, or that is predominantly women, to me, I've noticed there tends to be more collaboration rather than somebody being like, I'm just going to do the thing, which is not just, you know, it's not wholly different from what you're saying. I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin.
I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I feel like you have sort of like a dominant personality type sometimes that can come out at the table that I found personally, I found that more common at more male-dominated tables. I don't know about you, or if that's what you're trying to get at.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's exactly it.
I mean, I think it's interesting too with the combat versus roleplay thing. I remember watching, what was it? It was a session, a D&D session called Jox Machina, and it included Joe Manganiello was playing, and Travis Willingham from Critical Role, and I think the Big Show was there, and I'm blanking on who the fourth guy was, but the name. But it was like, it was one of those games where they were at very high levels, and it was just pretty much like 100% combat with all sorts of monsters and things like that. And as entertaining as some of the bits were that they had interacting in character, I still kind of was a little bored. I suppose, I don't know, I find the storytelling aspect more interesting, like with the Adventure Zone, where the McElroy brothers and your dad are like that's all an all-male group, but they still find ways to kind of do interesting things with storytelling and whatnot. And again, with Critical Role, like the whole fact that it's voice actors doing different characters, and especially when Matt is like basically doing every single voice for like the old crotchety like men or women, or the monsters, or some other like a brawny ogre sort of thing. It's just interesting how that affects like what's going on in the world. Role-playing is a little more involved than the combat itself. Because I feel like the combat, like if it's just combat, then it's kind of falls flat. At least for me personally.
Yeah.
I'll preface this by saying one of the things I noticed when I started playing D&D was kind of the spillover into my own life and vice versa. So my question is, what's something that you bring to your character, and what does your character bring to you?
Yeah, I saw this question and I found it really interesting because I had to think about it. Because for our campaign, I did put a lot of myself into my character, like a lot. She likes literature. I play a bard, but I can't sing or I'm not talented in that way, so I made her a more poetry type bard, and I write limericks to inspire party, things like that. So I feel like my character has that same like love of language that she focuses on, and the same impatience, and just a lot of my personalities in her. And then in reverse, I had to really think about that, but I think she is much more forgiving and less petty than I am, which she keeps things moving forward, which I don't always tend to do. So I think that's really interesting, and that is something that, you know, I've tried to be better at. So I did put that in my character and thinking about it. So I thought that was interesting. That's cool to think about.
I still find that I put too much of myself into my characters. Like I have a lot of quirks. Like in one game, I was playing a changeling of noble birth that was a basement child. And when she eventually grew up and escaped from her family's basement, she went off and did things like talk about her experiences in the basement, drawing comics based on the raccoons that she would see pass by. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to play more characters that are against, you know, basically my type, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. So I find myself putting too much of myself into my characters.
I find that I tend to, you know, even if I'm playing a character pretty different from myself, such as the shy, quiet, and tall Ophelia, there's still always some aspect of me in those characters that it's been hard to shake. And I love the idea of challenging yourself in that way to get out of your comfort zone.
Oh, I was just going to say, I tend to find that I actually play characters in general who are very different than I am in real life. So I'm kind of the opposite of like those of you who are saying that you put too much of yourself into your characters. I tend to definitely kind of branch out and try things that are very different. Like one of my long-running characters was an old man elf who was basically just kind of party dad.
Oh my God.
And my current one of my current characters is a half-orc fighter who very much just like stands there and looks intimidating, and I am absolutely not the body type or, you know, physical fitness to stand there and, you know, just stare people down and be scary in real life. So it's a lot of fun.
That's cool.
I always think that I'm making my characters pretty different from myself. Like I'm playing like, you know, a quite tall barbarian genasi, or I've done, you know, a fighter that's, you know, in Eberron and is Warforged. And then I was looking through a bunch of characters, and one of my friends made a note that all of my characters had made their dump stat charisma. And they're like, did you realize that you had made dump stat for charisma for everybody? I was like, I didn't, but now I'm looking at it and now I'm thinking about it constantly. But like, I'm not a general people person all the time. So I think that like subconsciously, you know, there are things that we tie into our characters that maybe while we're not like overtly saying like, you know, I want this character to be like me in these ways and different from me in these ways, sometimes our inner subconscious makes itself known in less overt or obvious ways. But I did make a promise that I'm going to play a high charisma character next time we play together.
That's cool. Do any of you guys find this question kind of occurred to me as I was thinking about you guys describing these different characters you're playing, and I was reminded of a conversation I had a while back about how dwarves in the D&D universe were portrayed, and that's shifted over time. And you know, in fantasy lore in general, there are, you know, different ways that dwarves are represented specifically, and what I'm really thinking of is like, oh, all dwarves have beards, even the women, and that this might be something, for example, for me, where I don't know that I would want to play a character like that, where I was being kind of penned into this, you look one way or you act one way. And I had a friend, actually a GM of mine as well, who asked, like, what are your feelings about that sort of thing? And I said, well, I don't have a fundamental problem with like all dwarves having beards and like the women dwarves having beards, but it does bother me that there's no female equivalent. Like it wouldn't bother me except that there's no female equivalent. Like if all elves had breasts or something. And by the way, and I clearly this was a perception that I was challenging for the first with this friend, because he reacted very aversely to the idea of all elves having breasts. But
I don't see why.
We can say breast on here, right, Tal? Yeah. Well, yeah. It's how is it different than a beard? It's a secondary sex trait. But that idea is interesting to me, in that like, I find myself often I tend to shy away from playing like quote unquote ugly characters or non-traditionally attractive characters at times. And I wonder kind of what everyone else's thought process is about playing characters.
I mean, I kind of played with that idea with my current character, who's a tiefling cleric. The idea of, oh, well, she's a tiefling that kind of passes off as human, where her skin is basically like, she looks like she just has a really bad sunburn all over, and like her horns are so small they're kind of nubs and under her hair. And if you were able to see the tail, it's kind of like a nub. So it's something that I think could and should be explored as far as body types or appearance. But again, I feel like with coming up with ideas for characters, the way they actually end up playing out, it can always end up being very different once you get into the actual game.
Most of the time when I'm playing in male-dominated spaces, it is difficult for me to play female characters. Or actually, I was playing an androgynous character, a furbolg that used they, them pronouns, was androgynous. And I was trying it out for the first time. Table was all male. And even though character was introduced androgynously, was introduced with they, them pronouns, the rest of the table had a hard time referencing that. So I got a lot of she's doing this and she's doing that and pointing at me, and essentially not seeing my character the way that I was seeing them. And so I will say that I want to do more of that, but I feel like you need to have a supportive table behind you to make sure that that is done in a respectful way and that everyone is on board with you. Because I feel like the table is what can help make or break that exploration. Because I think it's a really interesting exploration, but it needs to be in a safe space.
Definitely. And I will jump in and I will say that as far as pronouns, I've actually found that people have more difficulty using they, them pronouns for characters that I'm playing or portraying than they do remembering to use he, him while, still referring to me as the player as she, her. So like there's definitely some cognitive dissonance there that people seem to have a lot of trouble remembering that some characters are non-binary.
I wanted to ask this because it directly relates to this, and it's something that more than one female player has told me, particularly when they are playing with strangers, or with a group they don't know everyone, or they're playing for the first time. Some women will basically always play a male character or a genderless character or like androgynous character, basically as a way to dissuade stranger male players at the table from hitting on them during the game, like sort of to send a message that like that's not what I'm here for. And I'm just wondering if any of you folks have done that or seen that, or like at least can relate to that situation.
So I don't go as far as to necessarily play a male character if it's a group I don't know, but I definitely tend to play characters that are not as high charisma characters, that are much more statted into, being a tough fighter or whatever. So like my half-orc that I mentioned a little bit ago, that was a character that I brought in with a group that I did not know at all. And so she actually has a great charisma stat, but it's all in intimidation so that she can stand there and look scary. And she's very much not, designed to be a physically attractive character.
How in the future could artificial intelligence be implemented or contribute to the evolution of D&D? So for quick context, what kind of inspired the question was there's been a lot of programs and apps and things that have been introduced lately, like there's AI Dungeon, which is basically one of those deep learning type programs that's based on those old-fashioned like MS-DOS text adventures where ye find yourself in yon dungeon. Obvious exits are north, south, and Dennis. And just, it basically, you get to pick a prompt. You kind of end up being a character, whether it's like in a fantasy setting, a sci-fi setting, and say what you want to do, what action you want to take, and the story will automatically generate for you what happens next. And sometimes it can get super absurd because it is like a computer basically building off of what you wrote. And there was another website, Artflow, which you basically type a description, and a lot of people have done this for, I believe, like profile images for characters and stuff like that. So if you, for example, try to come up with like, I don't know, like a ragged looking goblin, like you type that in and it'll generate in a minute like that sort of image. So I wonder also what it would be like if, for example, if a dungeon master was an AI, like what could be done? Like there's so many different possibilities, I think.
Listening to all of this, what sprang to mind for me was that something that my partner, who is also a really fun D&D player and a talented dungeon master, has said to me before is, he crafts these amazing, interesting narratives, but he's like, the thing is, I'm always DMing the game that I want to play, and when I'm a player, somebody else is DMing the game that they want to play. So to have an AI DM or GM where you can say, this is the adventure that I want to play, I think is a really exciting concept and allows for our fabulous DMs and GMs who have such creativity to get to manifest it in multiple ways at once, by crafting an adventure, but then also getting to contribute to the world building and the progress of the adventure in a player form.
Right. And I mean, I think that using it as like a tool rather than, I guess, like having a machine replace like humans doing that sort of job, because that seems to be the ongoing like issue a lot of times with these things. Like, will AI make art, and will artists become obsolete because of that? So
I'll just tell you, Bonnie, that I'm in a couple of Discord servers with a lot of creators of Dungeons and Dragons, including a lot of illustrators and map makers and people like that. And this, particularly the site you mentioned, is it Artflow? There are a few other like AI art generating sites have been a hot topic of conversation in the past month, and the ethics basically of those sites. And some of the creators honestly are pretty terrified.
Yeah, like Dolly 2, I think,
Dolly
is
2,
one of the most recent ones. I think there is still stuff where things are intentionally fudged. Like, for example, I think that for certain like public figures, the AI will kind of purposely make it so that their face is uncanny enough so it's not an absolute likeness. So I think there's still a level of human control, and I think regardless as to how that turns out, artists will still have like a way to build on their creativity, and these machines aren't going to be 100% accurate. They're still going to have probably bugs and weird things, because even with how advanced they've become, you still can look at an image and be like, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look like a real person. There's something off.
I would like, actually, Bonnie, to have you on for an episode of the show, because I think there's an episode of the show just about AI and role-playing games. That's probably a really
absolutely
fascinating conversation in and of itself. My mind is going in a lot of different directions with it right now, and I think there a lot of other creators, particularly artists, who would love to weigh in on this. So just remind me to do that.
Oh yeah, I'd be glad to be involved in that.
It's a really good episode of this show. But for now, Rachel, Tamarin, final question of the evening.
It kind of piggybacks off of Bonnie's question, though it broadens the scope. And also with what we were talking about before, as the D&D universe has evolved, as the game systems have evolved, I would love to know from all of you, what are some new additions and enhancements you would like to see in the game? Where would you like Dungeons and Dragons to go in the future where it maybe hasn't gone yet?
So one thing that I've seen for other tabletop games that I would love to see, some more support for in the Dungeons and Dragons, main product line is the idea of solo adventures. They're basically kind of a choose your own adventure where as you go through, like it's pretty much a choose your own adventure book, except that you have roles and things along the way that it will prompt you to do. And as much as D&D is a great, collaborative group thing, I would love to see that option as well.
I just want to throw a cheap plug for a friend of mine, Paul Bimler. He also publishes as BC Beats. He has great solo D&D adventures that are available. Got a whole series, and he's also got he's published a book that's like a toolkit to help people create their own solo adventures using 5th edition.
Very cool.
Play in exactly that style where it's like a choose your own adventure book with dice.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Anybody else on what does D&D need that it doesn't currently have?
My brain's been stuck on this idea, and forgive me, I forgot who brought it up, but of like really making creative executive choices with player races. Like, I'm really stuck on this idea. Why can't all elves have breasts? Like doing something like, really making it so that like we kind of have to remember, speaking historically, that a lot of the races that we are playing with are races that came from, 1st edition, 2nd edition, which were predominantly made and manufactured and produced for men. So it's understandable that like we have some of these like traits baked into, these what we call classic player character races. But like, why can't we do something, really cool? Bringing up that another cool thing, like we had talked about way back at the beginning with the D&D movie. I was completely thrown off by the fact that we had a tiefling who had a regular skin tone. Like in my brain, my thought was all tieflings must be rainbow shades. But why? Why was I? The player book told me that. But why does that have to be the case? Why can't we have just really cool? I want to see more of that, more cool, and maybe we're talking about player handbook that like makes you get a little bit more creative in the process of making your character.
I love the trend that we've started to see, and I'd love to see it continue, of this subversion of what we would consider a monster race. There are good witches out there. I love a hag. I always say this. I love a hag. I like that they're out there. I want to see more subversion of like who do we see as a traditional villain, and are they really a villain, or do they have to be? I think that's an interesting idea to continue to explore with regard to new character development.
Going a little bit back to the question that I posed, but the idea of like VR sessions, like having like those virtual reality, like I think maybe they have done some Dungeons and Dragons games like that in VR. I'm not sure, but the idea of just like players like having their own avatar and literally acting out what they do in the game in real time, in real life, that to me might be what the future could hold. I'm not sure, but I don't know. It just seems like a funny idea of like people having the headsets on and just be acting in character. But
do you think like if there was like a VR version of Roll20 where you were kind of like in there,
right? The background would be like changed so that you're in the dungeon and every individual involved is like in character, but then the DM might be just like sitting there, just not really, I don't know, unless the DM would end up being the NPCs and acting in those roles too. Not sure how that would work. But
Rachel, Savicki, how soon do you think you could pull that together?
I'll get on it.
Okay.
I'm just imagining the interactive lighting situation with dark vision and characters.
It would be very, very cool.
Rachel used to work for Roll20. That's why I'm making that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to circle back to the all elves having breasts idea.
I'm so glad that this is like the takeaway.
This is what we keep going back to.
Someone trademark this.
I did want to mention that as of 2018, it's not necessarily that all elves do have breasts, but all elves can have breasts, because a rule was added in 2018 where you can choose, if you're playing an elf character, to have a trait called Blessed of Corellon. Corellon is the elven god who's androgynous, or alternatively male or female, or both, or neither. And they added this in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, where you can have this trait that allows, if you're playing an elf, every time you take a long rest, you can change your gender.
See, now why isn't this the top of like everyone's like bookshelf? Like, why is this? I'm just hearing about this.
I know. I thought it was really cool when they added that.
Yeah, there is an NPC who is a shopkeeper in, and I'm sure that there are more in other D&D adventures, but the one that's springing to mind is
Dragon Heist.
Yeah, they were the first. I believe they were the first non-binary NPC in an official adventure.
Yeah,
I'm forgetting their name, but they ran like an herbal shop.
Fala.
Yeah, it was. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, representation matters, right? We've been saying that, and I think it's. Yeah, that's how you find out about it, right? Is when you put these characters at the forefront, in the center, so that people are aware that they exist. Then you find out about them. Then you get to expand, right? You get more creative ideas and, new character traits. And
I don't know if we're gonna have a better closing tag than hashtag all elves have breasts, but I did want to say if there's anything that we've overlooked, or any other questions or thoughts that anybody would like to put out there before we wrap.
It doesn't just have to be elves. It could be really any race that has all breasts. I think it would be fun.
Now the question is the dimorphism of the like will male elves have the bigger breasts? Because that's sort of the case in some species of on Earth at least. So who knows? It might be the opposite of how humans are.
Where my mind went was there are certainly types of creatures in the universe that would not have two breasts. For example, if you were playing a tabaxi, would you have like a whole bunch?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a lot of possibilities.
So,
here.
like, what about minotaurs? Because then you're talking about like oxen, and like, what could that situation look like?
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
What you could create a new character class that's just a giant boob. I think that'd be great.
So clearly,
you have to fight a boob.
A boob holder.
So we'll get on that for Dungeon Master Guild. Yeah, I'm sure they'll love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, whichever of us can draw, we'll submit our our work for consideration.
Fantastic. We'll put together some stats. It'll be good. I'm sure it'll be a hit. It'll be a top seller.
Put boobs on an ooze.
Ooh.
I mean, slime girls are a thing.
What about a beholder, but it's a boob holder?
Ooh.
Oh.
I guess that's just a bra, right?
I want to fight that monster.
I very much enjoy that our discussion of Dungeons & Dragons from the perspective of women has landed here.
And, you're welcome, everyone.
I did want to let you know that the company that I work for, Oddfish Games, we're actually about to, in mid-September, we're going to launch a Kickstarter for a supplement that will allow people to play any RPG as they want as a solo game.
Awesome.
I love that.
Ooh.
That is so cool.
I will throw out there that if, depending on how the whole Roll20 and one bookshelf thing goes, if people need conversion to Roll20, you can always give me a shout. You can reach out through Cast Party to get in touch with me.
Awesome. And if you're looking to hire an online DM, I would be happy to talk to you about it. Either to do it myself or to put you in touch with Rachel or any one of our other awesome DMs for your game. I will,
and I'll plug Bonnie's artwork.
Yes.
Oh yeah, you could. Yeah. Yes, I have a. Yes, my website is Bonnie-Avery, squarespace.com. Very easy. Or you can check out my Instagram, which is hashtag BonBonBono, the 2 nicknames that I have that I absolutely hate. But it works. It works.
Tal, it's not a plug, but would Cast Party be willing to do one of their free games as an all-female game down the line?
Yes, totally. Of course we will. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be so cool.
Yeah, I think Rachel Savicki may be a good one for you to DM.
Yeah, definitely. We should find a good month for it and make sure that we hype it and get a good group and do it that way.
Cool. Thank you for the suggestion, Deborah. We will definitely do that. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on the show. Thank you to Deborah and Eileen and Rachel Tamarin and Rachel Savicki and Kristen and Bonnie and Sam and Maria, who did each have to jump off a few minutes ago, but really appreciate all of you taking the time to do this. Thank you all so much for listening. This is Power Word Talk from Cast Party. You can visit us at cast-party.com. Check us out on social media, Twitter at @castparty2, Instagram cast_party. We will be back here next month with another episode of Power Word Talk. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.